You are. You know why. It's time for AM Joy with my friend Joy Reid.
I do believe in meetings. I believe that having a meeting with Chairman Kim was a good thing. I think having meetings with the president of China was a very good thing. I believe it's really good. So having meetings with Russia, China, and North Korea, I believe in it. Nothing bad's going to come out of it, and maybe some good will come out. But I go in with low expectations. I'm not going with high expectations. I can't tell you what's going to happen, but I can tell you what I'll be asking for, and we'll see if something comes of it.
Good morning and welcome to AM Joy. Any moment now, Donald Trump is expected to leave his golf property in Scotland. Incidentally, he spent 128 days visiting a golf property he owns since becoming president. He's now headed to Helsinki, Finland, to meet with Vladimir Putin. And this is what will greet him when he gets there. Lots and lots of protesters. A familiar sight on Trump's tour of Europe this week. Needless to say, he is not well liked over there. His one-on-one with Putin has taken on greater significance after Friday's indictments of 12 Russian intelligence officers accused of attacking the 2016 election. On that point, Trump says he hasn't thought about asking Putin to extradite the indicted intelligence officers.
The Russians who were indicted, would you ask Putin to send them here?
Well, I might. I hadn't thought of that, but certainly I'll be asking about it.
That is emblematic of Trump's approach to this meeting as a whole. There's no clear agenda, sparking fears that it could veer off the rails and wind up with Trump giving away the farm. But one issue Putin may bring up, sanctions. Now, it's worth remembering that in December of 2016, Trump's 23-day national security advisor, Michael Flynn, who later pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI about his contacts with Russia, reassured then Russian Ambassador Sergei Kislyak that the Trump administration would reverse the Obama administration's sanctions on Russia once in office. That led to Putin refraining from retaliating. The next day, Trump tweeted praise to Putin for the move. Joining me now from Helsinki is former U.S. Ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul. He's also the author of From Cold War to Hot Peace, an American ambassador in Putin's Russia. And Ambassador McFaul, thank you for being here. I want to start with the readout of what it is that, at least according to the Associated Press, Donald Trump wants from this meeting. Number one, the optics of a formal, full-on red carpet meeting with Putin, improved relationships between the U.S. and Russia, and a relationship personally with Vladimir Putin. Not on that list, notably, is the extradition of those 12 intelligence officers. What are your thoughts on that?
Pretty striking, Joy. Why is it not on the list? They've been indicted by his government, by the United States of America. For President Trump not to ask for their extradition, he won't get it, of course, but for him not to ask for it is a big mistake. And everything on that list has nothing to do with American national interests. It's all about the form of the meeting and not about the substance of U.S.-Russian relations.
Now, you know, we've had past U.S. presidents attempt to forge a better relationship with Russia, or specifically with Putin. George W. Bush famously said he looked into Putin's eyes and got a sense of his soul. President Obama, when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, tried this Russia reset, in part with Putin's successor. So it's not as if this is the first time an American president has tried to have warmer relations. In your view, what is different about Donald Trump's approach from these previous presidents?
Well, Joy, I worked at the White House during the reset years that you just mentioned with President Obama. And what I think people misunderstand about that period is we were not trying to, quote unquote, improve relations with Russia. Rather, we were trying to get concrete things done. For instance, we got a START treaty done, which reduced by 30% the number of nuclear weapons that the United States and Russia had. We got sanctions on Iran. We got a new supply route to Afghanistan. Very concrete things that we believe were in the American interest. What is different about President Trump's approach is he just makes the meeting itself and his personal relationship with Putin the goal, and we have no idea what the substantive agenda that he's trying to achieve.
Yeah.
That's what's different about the Obama era versus now.
Let's look at the Associated Press's readout of what Putin would want from the meeting. He would want better relations with the U.S. Clearly, sanctions lifted, not just the Magnitsky Act sanctions, but the sanctions that were imposed because of his seizure of Crimea, a pullback of NATO forces deployed near Russia's border, something Trump has seemed to say he might be open to, and a rapport with Trump personally. And I want to play you Donald Trump talking about how he thinks he would get along with Putin and let you give your assessment of whether or not Putin can get what he wants out of this man. Take a listen.
I think I'd get along very well with Vladimir Putin. I just think so. People would say, what do you mean? I think I'd get along well with him. I think I would have a great relationship with Russia and with Putin.
Will he be prepared? Will he be prepared? And I might even end up having a good relationship, but they're going, will President Trump be prepared? You know, President Putin is KGB and this and that. You know what? Putin's fine. He's fine. We're all fine.
Just give me an assessment, having dealt with Vladimir Putin, him going into a meeting with that person. What do you think he thinks he can get out of it?
It just pains me to hear all those quotes, Joy. Thanks for playing them again. The goal of American foreign policy is not to get along with Putin. Remember, this is a guy that violated our sovereignty in 2016, propped up a dictator in Syria in 2015 by military intervention, annexed Crimea in 2014, seizing land for the first time since World War II in Europe. So the goal is not just to forget about all those things, just to get along. And I just think President Trump doesn't understand that basic thing of diplomacy. For Putin, it's really simple how to make this successful. If Trump doesn't remember any of that history and they just say, let's just get along, that's a giant victory for Putin. That's all he needs. All those other things you mentioned, that's just icing on the cake.
Yeah. Ambassador Michael McFaul, who's in Helsinki, thank you very much for being here this morning. Really appreciate your insights. Thank you. Let's bring in our panel now. Nina Khrushcheva is a professor of international affairs at the New School. Natasha Bertrand, staff writer at The Atlantic. And Jason Johnson, politics editor at TheRoot.com and an MSNBC political contributor. And just for my producers not to confuse you guys, I'm going to stay with the elements that we had for this segment. And I want to play Donald Trump, the current ambassador to Russia, John Huntsman, this morning on Meet the Press, was asked if Donald Trump would stick to the belief that, of NATO nations that Crimea belongs to the Ukraine and not to Russia. Nina, I want to play that and get your response to it. Let's take a listen.
The agenda is the president's. Everything will be his call, but I think it's highly unlikely that you'll see any change in Crimea. This was a violation of international law. What we've seen in eastern Ukraine is a violation of international law.
But you didn't rule it out.
Chuck.
Ambassador, I noticed you didn't rule it out. You said that it's the president's call, so he could very well just sort of say, you know what, even though everybody else doesn't think this is a good idea?
Of course, it's the president's call, but I think it's highly unlikely that that's going to emerge in their conversation, as you suggest.
It's diplomatic speak, Nina, but it highly unlikely is not an assurance, I would add, that Donald Trump won't simply recognize Crimea as belonging to Russia, because he's made noises in the past that he might be open to it.
And it could be he would continue to make noises in the past. And I'm sure Putin may bring it up and say, well, Crimea has been historically Russian, and if Kosovo is part of former Yugoslavia, was recognized as an independent nation, why not Crimea? I think what Trump is against here is not so much as agreeing with Putin as that to convince the rest of the world. So I think I am almost certain that he would continue to make that noise, and he would say, as far as I'm concerned, Crimea is Russian. But President Trump goes against anything that America has ever stood for, America has ever spoken about. He gets along with Putin, or thinks he's going to get along with Putin more than he gets along with his allies and whatnot. So I don't know why we're so beaten out of shape about it, because it really, that's what we've seen in Trump in the past 2 years. Whatever we think is wrong, he's going to say it's right.
Can you just give us, from your point of view, then what are the consequences of that? It does feel like we're in this moment of realignment where Donald Trump very much wants to realign the American center as being Erdogan, Xi of China, Putin, the strongmen, or Viktor Orban of Hungary, and this new leader of Italy on one side, and Putin, and the traditional U.S. allies, France, Germany, England, et cetera, on the other side. What are the real-world global consequences if he's able to achieve that?
Well, remember when he met with Kim Jong-un, one of the first things he said is that when he speaks to his people, Kim Jong-un, they sit down and listen, and I want the same thing. So he wants the same thing. But I think that Trump, in my view, is a consequence of already happening turn of the world. I mean, it is the kind of this authoritarian Democrats. I mean, Democrats in a sense that they were being, there's a sense they were being elected. So he is almost on the coattails of already very much happening tide wave. And I think that is a shame that America has joined that kind of tide. But at the same time, it's really not that original. And I think the challenge is for Europe, of those who are remaining Democrats in Europe, to make sure that they do present united front and they don't get discouraged by the Putins of the world, by the Erdogans, by the Trumps of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to, Natasha, play, just there's an interesting dichotomy here. This is first, let's play Donald Trump. This was in a CBS interview. He actually has done an interview with somebody who was in Fox. He interviewed with CBS, and he's talking about the Russian attack on our election. Let's listen to that.
This was during the Obama administration. They were doing whatever it was during the Obama administration. And I heard that they were trying, or people were trying, to hack into the RNC, too, the Republican National Committee. But we had much better defenses. I've been told that by a number of people. We had much better defenses, so they couldn't. I think the DNC should be ashamed of themselves for allowing themselves to be hacked.
So Donald Trump, Natasha, goes into the past and blames President Obama, which is what he does pretty much for everything. But he doesn't really address the substance of the attacks themselves and what they mean to his country, to the United States. Here's Dan Coats, his director of national intelligence, sounding a very different note on Friday about those same cyber attacks on our election systems. Take a listen.
Focusing on the potential impact of these actions on our midterm elections misses the more important point. These actions are persistent, they're pervasive, and they are meant to undermine America's democracy on a daily basis. The warning signs are there. The system is blinking. And it is why I believe we are at a critical point.
So, you know, there are two ways to look at that. That maybe underneath Donald Trump's sort of just noise and bluster where he wants to be aligned with Vladimir Putin and doesn't particularly care about the election attack, all he cares about is blaming it on Obama. Underneath the presidential layer, is there activity in the Trump administration to protect the country? Or is the Coats sound the noise and the Trump sound the substance? Which, from your reporting, is it?
The latter. What I'm hearing is that the intelligence community, the national security community, is really not doing anything to protect against the meddling that Russia is currently doing and will interfere, of course, in the 2018 midterms. What I'm hearing is that whereas the national security and intelligence community would have been going full steam ahead, trying to protect against these hacks, trying to protect against, Russian propaganda infiltrating our entire system, that is not being done now. And the question that we're all trying to answer is why not? Why is this infrastructure not being built now in a way that it would have been and the way that we should have learned after 9/11? I mean, Dan Coats, he compared the attack that Russia did on our democracy to the attack on 9/11, and that is extremely striking. And I think that this is completely emblematic of the disconnect between Trump and his own administration, because the administration wants to do something. They have a clenched fist when it comes to Russia, but Donald Trump is going in with open arms, and the question is why. And I think that the biggest example of that, of course, was when Rod Rosenstein announced those indictments on Friday, just 3 days before Trump's meeting with Putin. I mean, that just shows, just the fact that he briefed Trump only 3 days or 4 days prior to announcing those indictments and didn't really get his input on them at all just shows how strikingly divergent their priorities are when it comes to countering this threat.
And then, so Jason, then the next question, of course, is that when you broaden it out to the Republican Party, you're out there reporting on all of these elections out in the country, and it's not clear whether the clenched fist of some people in the administration, the Rod Rosensteins of the world, who really do want to hit back against this Russian attack on our election, and the Trump part where he wants to embrace Russia, but also the Republicans who are behind him in the House of Representatives who just want to beat up on Rod Rosenstein. Out in the country, are Republican elections officials attempting to guard the election? Are Republicans out in the world caring more about these Russian attacks than the administration?
Well, Joy, I think it almost goes state by state, right? So here in Maryland, there was just a report earlier this week about the fact that the Justice Department actually went to the state of Maryland and said, hey, look, there's a Russian oligarch who has a large investment in the software program that you use to count votes. maybe you should be aware of that. Maybe you should pay attention. So occasionally in some states, you have some elected officials who are saying, okay, we need to be concerned. And I've always thought, I don't care if it's an ally or an enemy or anything else like that. Election integrity should be our primary concern. Now, I don't care if it's a British company, an Australian company, a Russian company, or a Chinese country. No foreign entity should have too large an investment in how our electoral systems operate. So unfortunately, I think it's state by state. But the larger issue, of course, is this. Part of the indictments on Friday is one of the things that Mueller mentioned is that you had a Republican candidate who supposedly reached out to try and get in touch with Guccifer to find out information about Democrats. The fact that you have one of the two major political parties in the United States actively encouraging the sort of degradation of American democracy just so they can win the local elections, and then stifling the kind of work that needs to be done to keep our country safe is a very dangerous precedent. It doesn't matter if the Russians completely scuttle or even don't have much of an impact in the 2018 election. The fact that they've been able to do so will embolden not just them, but China and any other nation out there that feels, well, if America's not paying attention to their back door, we can walk right in.
Yeah, so before we go, Nina, is it likely that Russia does it again, having gotten away with it, having really clearly gotten away with it, and even been rewarded for it with a personal one-on-one meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin? Is it likely that they do it again in 2018?
Well, I think politically it is possible that the Putin hand is not going to be seen in 2018, because that's how Donald Trump can claim, well, when the weak Barack Obama was here, they did it. Yeah. But now, when I am in charge of making America great, even the Russians do not bother, or they actually do not dare to deal with it. And Putin can give him this kind of present. Right. On the other hand, as Jason brilliantly pointed out, American politics is so partisan that I'm not going to be surprised if the Republicans would ask Putin to help with the Democrats, so they're not going to take over the House. So I think it can go both ways. Yeah. But both of it is very dangerous, and of course Donald Trump is going to contribute. I mean, his towering, larger-than-life figure is going to contribute to one outcome of another, and none of them are democratic.
Wow, it's pretty scary. Nina Khrushcheva, thank you very much. We'll have to have you back very soon as we continue to analyze this horror. Natasha Bertrand and Jason Johnson will be back later in the show. Meanwhile, House conservatives